I'm Melissa, 27, and I never thought I'd have to fight my own family for my lifeline. Nana, my epilepsy service dog, cost $28,000 in fundraising and 2 years of specialized training. She's detected every seizure before it happened, giving me independence I never thought possible. Until last Saturday, when I found her missing and that cold note, gave Nana to shelter. Can't afford pets when family needs help with bills. I texted back, understood. They thought they'd saved $100 monthly on dog food. Instead, they just lost $83,000 in annual support, their house, and me. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you've ever felt betrayed by family, hit subscribe to join our healing community. My journey with epilepsy began when I was 15, during sophomore year of high school. I still remember the day of my first seizure, right in the middle of biology class while dissecting a frog. 1 minute I was carefully making an incision, the next I was surrounded by paramedics with concerned classmates peeking through the classroom door windows. The diagnosis came quickly: epilepsy, specifically tonic-clonic seizures that would reshape my entire life. High school became a daily challenge. Despite medication, seizures continued unpredictably. I'd wake up disoriented on the gym floor or in the nurse's office, missing chunks of my day and facing the whispers and stares of classmates who didn't understand. College was even harder. I attempted dorm life, but after 3 emergency calls in 1 semester, I moved back home, continuing my education while living with my parents. The medications seemed endless: Lamictal, Keppra, Depakote, Topamax. Each with its own constellation of side effects that sometimes felt worse than the seizures themselves. Brain fog made studying nearly impossible. Weight gain and hair loss damaged what little self-confidence remained. Through 6 years and 12 medication combinations, my neurologist classified me as having drug-resistant epilepsy, a diagnosis that felt like a life sentence. Independence seemed impossible. Driving was out of the question. Career options narrowed dramatically: no operating heavy machinery, no high-stress environments, no jobs requiring perfect attention to detail during my foggy periods. My parents drove me everywhere well into my 20s, a fact that inspired both gratitude and crushing shame. My family tried their best at first. Mom and Dad supported me through the initial diagnosis, attending every neurologist appointment and diligently researching treatment options. They came from solid middle-class backgrounds. Dad worked as a construction project manager while Mom taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. They weren't wealthy, but we always had enough for necessities and small luxuries. Until my brother Jason's gambling problem began eating away at the family finances. It started small in his college years: weekend poker games, sports betting with friends. Mom and Dad dismissed it as harmless fun, even when he'd ask for loans to cover rent or car payments. What I didn't know then was that those small loans had ballooned into massive debts that my parents were quietly covering from their retirement savings. The family dynamic shifted subtly. My medical needs became expensive complications, while Jason's requests were simply helping him through a rough patch. My medications, averaging $400 monthly after insurance, became dinner table discussion topics about cost-cutting. Meanwhile, no one mentioned the thousands disappearing into Jason's black hole of gambling debts. The idea of a service dog came during my darkest period. After a particularly severe seizure that left me hospitalized for 3 days, my neurologist mentioned that specially trained dogs could detect seizures before they happened, sometimes by up to 45 minutes. This early warning could be life-changing, allowing me to take emergency medication, get to a safe position, or call for help. The research consumed me. Service dogs trained for epilepsy detection were rare and incredibly expensive: $28,000 for a fully trained animal. Insurance wouldn't cover it, considering it an experimental treatment. I launched a fundraising campaign through my local epilepsy support group, church community, and online platforms. For 18 months, I sold homemade candles, organized benefit concerts, and shared my story with anyone willing to listen. Against all odds, we reached the goal. The day I met Nana, a gentle golden retriever with intelligent eyes, changed everything. She completed her basic training at a specialized facility in Colorado, then moved in with me for another 6 months of personalized training. We learned to communicate in subtle ways, her nudging my hand when she sensed chemical changes preceding a seizure, her retrieval of my emergency medication, her positioning herself to break my fall if necessary. The first time Nana alerted me to an oncoming seizure, I was shopping for groceries. She suddenly became agitated, pawing at my leg and giving her distinctive warning whine. I abandoned my cart, made it to my car, took my emergency medication, and called my mom. 20 minutes later, the seizure came, but I was safe, prepared, and for the first time, not terrified. With Nana by my side, independence bloomed. I moved into my own apartment 10 minutes from my parents' home. I secured a remote position as a software quality analyst, working flexible hours that accommodated my medical needs. My seizures didn't stop, but they became manageable disruptions rather than life-halting catastrophes. I visited my parents every weekend, bringing Nana, who they initially welcomed. Dad would slip her treats while Mom pretended not to notice. We settled into a new normal that felt sustainable, until the financial strain of Jason's addiction finally broke through the surface of our family's carefully maintained facade. Last Saturday began like any other visit to my parents' home. Nana and I completed our morning routine, her breakfast, my medications, our short walk around my apartment complex where she greeted her favorite neighbors with dignified tail wags. I packed her service vest, special food, medication, and favorite tennis ball for our overnight stay. The drive to my parents' suburban home took exactly 12 minutes. Mom greeted us at the door with her typical Saturday enthusiasm, complimenting my new haircut and fussing over whether I'd been eating properly. Dad called out from the living room where he was watching golf, his standard weekend occupation. Jason had unexpectedly joined for dinner, something that had become increasingly rare as his gambling problems worsened. Dinner felt normal on the surface. Mom's lasagna, Dad's corny jokes, Jason's stories about his sales job. But undercurrents of tension rippled beneath the conversation. Mom mentioned their water heater needed replacement. Dad commented about postponing their anniversary trip. Jason stayed unusually quiet when finances came up, studying his plate intensely. Nana stayed dutifully by my side throughout dinner, occasionally resting her head on my lap. Jason barely acknowledged her presence, something I attributed to his general self-absorption rather than specific animosity toward my service animal. If only I'd recognized the calculating looks he gave her when he thought I wasn't watching. After dinner, we watched a movie together. I noticed Mom counting out my dad's heart medication with unusual attention to the prescription details. "These refills are getting so expensive," she muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. Dad quickly changed the subject, asking about my latest work project with forced enthusiasm. Around 11, I excused myself to the guest room where Nana and I had stayed countless times before. She settled into her familiar spot at the foot of the bed, service vest removed, but always on duty. I took my evening medications, set my seizure monitor on the nightstand, and fell asleep with the comfortable knowledge that Nana would alert me if anything happened during the night. Morning arrived with unsettling silence. Normally, Nana would gently nudge me awake around 7. I opened my eyes at 8:30, immediately sensing something wrong. The room felt emptier, lacking the warm presence I'd grown dependent on. "Nana?" I called, my voice thick with sleep and growing concern. The note sat on the nightstand, folded once and written in my father's precise handwriting. "Gave Nana to shelter. Can't afford pets when family needs help with bills. She'll find a good home. We need to discuss more practical solutions for your condition." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. The casual cruelty of pets when referring to my medically necessary service animal. The dismissal of 2 years of specialized training. The dangerous assumption that my condition could be managed by practical solutions that wouldn't inconvenience them financially. I found my parents and Jason in the kitchen, eating breakfast as if nothing had happened. Mom looked up with rehearsed concern. "Sweetie, we need to talk about more sustainable options for your epilepsy management." Dad cleared his throat. "The dog was costing us every time you visited. Special food, shedding everywhere, taking up space. We're in a tight spot financially, and difficult decisions had to be made." "Nana wasn't your decision to make," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "She's my medical equipment, not a pet." Jason snorted. "Medical equipment doesn't eat 50 pounds of premium dog food monthly. We're talking about real problems here, Melissa. The family's about to lose the house because of Dad's medical bills." Mom jumped in quickly. "Not lose the house, exactly. But we've had to take out a second mortgage. Your father's heart medication doubled in price, and with everything else." She trailed off, gesturing vaguely to encompass their financial difficulties, and subtly toward Jason, the unacknowledged drain on their resources. I felt hollow, disconnected from the conversation happening around me. They continued justifying their actions, explaining the family's needs, the difficult choices, the practical considerations, while I silently calculated how quickly I could leave and begin searching for Nana. "Which shelter?" I finally interrupted. Their exchanged glances told me everything. They hadn't expected this question, or perhaps they'd expected tears, pleading, an emotional breakdown they could manage with practiced parental concern. "Melissa, be reasonable," Dad started. "The shelter will find her a good home. She's a beautiful purebred. Someone will love having her as a pet." "Which shelter?" Each word came out clipped, final. Mom sighed. "Greenfield County Animal Services. But sweetie, they have a 3-day holding period before adoption. She's probably already spoken for." I nodded once, pulled out my phone, and typed the single-word response. "Understood." Then I gathered my belongings, ignored their attempts at further conversation, and walked out the front door. In my car, the panic finally overwhelmed me. My hands shook too violently to insert the key into the ignition. My chest constricted as if bound by iron bands. Without Nana's early warning system, I couldn't tell if this was anxiety or an oncoming seizure, the dangerous uncertainty I'd lived with before her. After 10 minutes of controlled breathing, I managed to start the car and pull out my phone. Greenfield County Animal Services was 30 miles away, a 40-minute drive in the opposite direction from my apartment. I called them with trembling fingers. "Good morning, Greenfield County Animal Services," a cheerful voice answered. "You received a golden retriever surrender yesterday," I said, skipping pleasantries. "Her name is Nana. She's my service dog. I need to confirm she's still there." The pause lasted too long. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we can't disclose information about surrendered animals to anyone but the surrendering party. Family disputes over pets are very common, and we have policies." "She's not a pet," I interrupted, my voice breaking. "She's a registered service animal for epilepsy. Her training cost $28,000. Please, I just need to know she's safe." Another pause. "I can neither confirm nor deny any specific animal's presence at our facility. Our adoption viewing hours end at 5 today." The message was clear, "Come quickly." I hung up and pressed the accelerator harder than I ever had before. The 40-minute drive to Greenfield County Animal Services became a blur of highway exits and traffic lights, my mind racing faster than my car. Every minute felt critical. What if someone was already adopting her? What if they deemed her unadoptable for some reason? Service dogs often struggled in shelter environments after bonding so completely with their handlers. I called my friend Rachel, barely coherent through my panic. "They took Nana. My parents surrendered her to a shelter while I was sleeping. I need help." Rachel, always practical in a crisis, asked the right questions. Which shelter? Do you have all her documentation? I'll meet you there. Call your neurologist's office for an emergency statement about medical necessity. With shaking hands, I dialed my neurologist's answering service, explaining the situation to the weekend nurse. Dr. Patterson, my neurologist for 8 years, called back within minutes, outrage evident in her typically calm voice. This is completely unacceptable. I'm sending an emergency medical necessity letter to your email right now. Print it at the shelter if needed. I'm also calling them directly. The shelter parking lot was half full when I arrived, weekend adoptions in full swing. The cheerful yellow building with painted paw prints seemed to mock the emergency unfolding in my life. I grabbed my documentation folder from the glove compartment, Nana's service animal certification, her specialized training records, my medical history, and now Dr. Patterson's emergency letter. Inside, families wandered between kennels, children pointing excitedly at potential pets. The cacophony of barking, meowing, and excited voices made my already frazzled nerves worse. I approached the front desk, trying to project calm authority despite my internal chaos. I'm here about a service dog surrender, I said to the young receptionist. Golden retriever named Nana, brought in yesterday. Her expression shifted to practiced neutrality. Are you the surrendering party, ma'am? No. I'm her handler. She's my registered service dog for epilepsy detection. My parents surrendered her without my knowledge or consent while I was asleep. I'm sorry, but shelter policy prohibits. This isn't about shelter policy, I interrupted, placing my documentation on the counter. This is about federal law. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, Nana is classified as medical equipment. Surrendering her without my consent is conversion of property at minimum and possibly disability discrimination. The receptionist blinked, clearly not trained for the situation. Let me get the manager. While waiting, Rachel arrived, giving me a fierce hug before standing beside me like a bodyguard. The shelter manager, a tired-looking woman in her 50s named Carol according to her name tag, emerged from the back office. I understand there's a situation with a surrender, she began cautiously. I repeated my explanation, showing her Nana's documentation and Dr. Patterson's letter. Additionally, my neurologist should have called regarding this matter. Carol nodded slowly. She did. This is unusual. The surrender paperwork was completed by Gordon and Linda Turner. They identified themselves as the owners. They're my parents, and they've never been Nana's legal owners. I have all the original receipts, training documentation, and registration in my name only. I pulled out the fundraising records showing my name as the recipient and purchaser. Carol studied the documents, frowning. Even in complex situations, we have protocols. The animal has been surrendered with signed paperwork. Legally, Rachel interrupted. You're now in possession of stolen medical equipment worth $28,000 and potentially interfering with necessary medical treatment for a person with a disability. Carol held up her hand. I understand the seriousness. Let me take you back to see if this is indeed your service animal. The kennel area smelled of disinfectant and stress. Dogs barked frantically as we passed, all except one. In the last kennel, Nana lay motionless on a thin blanket, her usually bright eyes dull and distant. She didn't respond to the noises around her. A trained service dog's discipline transformed into depression. Nana, I whispered, dropping to my knees outside the kennel door. Her head lifted instantly, eyes focusing on me with such intensity it nearly knocked me backward. A whine built in her throat, followed by her distinct alert bark, the one reserved for finding me after we'd been separated. That's certainly a recognition response, Carol commented, watching our interaction. She's trained to alert to my seizures before they happen, I explained, fingers gripping the kennel door. She can detect chemical changes up to 45 minutes before an episode. Without her, I could have a seizure while driving, cooking, or bathing. She's not just emotional support, She's seizure detection, emergency response, and medical alert all in one. As if understanding her job was being discussed, Nana stood at attention, her demeanor transforming from defeated shelter animal to working service dog despite the absence of her vest. "There's still the matter of the surrender paperwork," Carol said, though her tone had softened considerably. "Your parents legally signed." "They had no legal right to surrender property they don't own," Rachel interjected. "Would you allow someone's parents to surrender their wheelchair or hearing aids?" Carol sighed. "Let me make some calls. This may take some time to resolve." "I'm not leaving without her," I stated firmly. "I'll sign whatever temporary custody forms you need, but she's coming home with me today." While Carol made calls, Nana remained fixated on me through the kennel door, occasionally pawing at it when I moved too far away. A shelter volunteer brought me a chair, placing it directly in front of Nana's kennel. "She wouldn't eat since arriving," the volunteer whispered. Now we know why. An hour later, the shelter director himself arrived. Apparently, Dr. Patterson's calls had reached the highest levels of the organization. Dr. Martin was a veterinarian with 30 years of experience and, fortunately, knowledge of service animal law. "This is straightforward from a legal perspective," he explained after reviewing my documentation. "Service animals are considered medical equipment under federal law. The ADA protects your right to this assistance, regardless of family disputes. The surrender was invalid from the beginning." He turned to Carol. "Prepare release paperwork for medical equipment improperly surrendered. Note potential legal implications for the shelter and document everything thoroughly." To me, he added, "You would have grounds for legal action against both your parents and potentially this facility. I'm hoping resolving this immediately mitigates those concerns." Within 20 minutes, Nana was released to my custody. The moment the kennel door opened, she pressed her body against my legs, performing a quick check of my physical state as she'd been trained. Finding me seizure-free but emotionally distraught, she settled into her alerting position, her body weight providing comforting pressure. "That's clearly a trained response," Dr. Martin observed. "I've worked with many service dogs, and that bond can't be faked." As we completed the paperwork, Dr. Martin explained that they would document this as an improper surrender of medical equipment rather than an animal adoption return. "This documentation may be important if you decide to pursue legal action," he advised. "What your parents did potentially violated several laws protecting individuals with disabilities." The word legal action echoed in my mind as Rachel drove us home, Nana pressed against me in the back seat. I'd never considered taking legal action against my own family. The thought seemed unthinkable before today, but so had the possibility they would steal my service animal while I slept under their roof. By evening, Nana and I were safely home in my apartment. She refused to leave my side even for a moment, her training temporarily overridden by the trauma of our separation. As the adrenaline of the rescue mission faded, my phone buzzed with messages from my parents, alternating between anger at me retrieving Nana and justifications for their actions. I silenced the phone, buried my face in Nana's fur, and tried to process how the people who had raised me could so fundamentally misunderstand or disregard my medical needs. And for the first time, I allowed myself to consider what legal options might protect both Nana and myself from ever experiencing this betrayal again. The initial fallout arrived by Sunday evening in a barrage of text messages and voicemails from my family. Mom vacillated between tearful pleas to understand their financial situation and passive-aggressive comments about my overreaction. Dad's messages were terse, focusing on practical matters like retrieving the rest of my belongings from their house. Jason, predictably, was the most direct. "It's just a dog. Family comes first." Each message revealed how fundamentally they misunderstood. Nana wasn't just a dog, she was the difference between independence and institutionalization, between driving and relying on others for transportation, between holding a job and collecting disability. The $100 monthly they thought they were saving on her premium food was nothing compared to the freedom she provided. Extended family soon joined the fray. Aunt Patricia, Mom's sister and a registered nurse, called to offer her unequivocal support. What they did was dangerous and illegal, she stated bluntly. Your cousin Ryan is finishing law school. He says you have a solid case for conversion of property and possibly emotional distress. Meanwhile, my paternal grandparents defended their son's actions. Your parents are struggling financially. They thought they were making the best decision for everyone, Grandma explained gently, as if speaking to a child refusing to share toys. I made the difficult decision to block my immediate family's numbers temporarily. Each conversation elevated my stress levels, and by Monday morning, the consequences of that stress became dangerously apparent. The seizure struck while I was making breakfast. Nana alerted just 15 minutes before, less warning than usual, likely due to my elevated stress hormones masking the typical chemical changes she detected. Still, it was enough time to move away from the hot stove, take emergency medication, and position myself safely on the living room carpet. When consciousness returned, Nana lay pressed against my side in her recovery position, preventing me from rolling or injuring myself during the disorienting post-seizure phase. My tongue was sore from biting it, a common occurrence during seizures. The kitchen timer beeped insistently where I'd left eggs cooking. This seizure, my first in nearly 3 weeks, highlighted exactly why Nana was essential. Without her warning, I could have fallen against the stove, been driving, or been alone in the shower. The potential consequences ranged from minor burns to fatal accidents. My neurologist fit me in for an emergency appointment that afternoon. Dr. Patterson documented the seizure and its probable connection to the emotional trauma of the weekend's events. The medical literature is clear that stress is a significant seizure trigger for many epilepsy patients, she explained, updating my chart. What your parents did directly endangered your health by both removing your seizure alert system and inducing extreme stress. She printed an updated medical necessity letter for my records. This clearly states that separation from your service animal constitutes a direct threat to your health and safety. I've included citations to relevant medical studies and detailed your specific case history. As we discussed medication adjustments to manage the stress-induced increase in seizure activity, Dr. Patterson asked the question I'd been avoiding. Have you considered legal action? What they did wasn't just hurtful, it was potentially life-threatening. The following day, I met with a disability rights advocate recommended by my epilepsy support group. Sandra Carter had 20 years of experience navigating the complex legal landscape of disability accommodations and service animal rights. Let's break down exactly what Nana provides, Sandra suggested, opening a spreadsheet on her tablet. Then we'll calculate what these services would cost without her. We listed each function: seizure detection 30 to 45 minutes prior to episodes, emergency medication retrieval, alerting others during a seizure, providing stabilization during and after episodes, preventing injury during falls, and offering mobility support during post-seizure confusion. Now for the financial reality, Sandra continued. Private in-home medical monitoring would cost approximately $4,000 monthly. A full-time medical assistant qualified to administer emergency medications would be around $5,000 monthly. Emergency response services with guaranteed under 30-minute arrival times average $1,500 monthly. And that's not counting the lost independence, ability to drive, or maintain employment. The total shocked me. Approximately $83,000 annually for services that Nana provided naturally, with greater efficiency and without privacy invasion. Insurance typically covers none of these alternatives, Sandra added. They'd rather pay for emergency room visits after injuries than prevention. And they certainly won't cover 24/7 in-home care. She set down her tablet, expression serious. Your parents' actions have potentially massive legal implications. By removing your medical alert system, They directly endangered your life and violated several provisions of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Insurance complications emerged next. My health insurance case manager called Wednesday morning, concerned about the reported service animal separation. Your care plan is predicated on having seizure alert assistance, she explained. Without that, we'd need to reclassify your risk category, which could affect coverage for independent living. The financial reality became increasingly clear. Without Nana, I would potentially lose my insurance coverage for living independently, lose my ability to drive safely, and consequently lose my job. The $100 monthly my parents thought they were saving could have cost me everything. By Thursday, I'd made the difficult decision to consult with a disability rights attorney. Catherine Jimenez specialized in service animal law and had successfully handled several cases involving family interference with service animals. Unfortunately, your situation isn't unique, Catherine explained during our consultation. Family members often fail to understand the legal status of service animals and the potentially serious consequences of interfering with them. She outlined 3 potential legal claims: conversion of property, taking my service animal without permission, intentional infliction of emotional distress, knowingly causing psychological harm through their actions, and violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, interfering with my legally protected accommodations. I recommend starting with a formal demand letter, Catherine suggested. It outlines the legal violations, requests specific remedies, and establishes that you're serious about protecting your rights. Many cases resolve at this stage when people understand the potential consequences of their actions. The letter would request financial compensation for the emotional distress and increased medical costs resulting from their actions, a formal written apology acknowledging Nana's status as medical equipment, and a legally binding agreement never to interfere with my service animal again. What about my brother? I asked, suspecting Jason's gambling debts were the real financial drain my parents were trying to address. If he encouraged your parents to surrender the service animal knowing its purpose, he could potentially share liability, Catherine explained. Family dynamics are complicated, but the law regarding service animals is quite clear. As Catherine drafted the demand letter, I struggled with conflicting emotions. These were my parents, the people who had supported me through diagnosis, driven me to countless medical appointments, and helped fundraise for Nana initially. How had we reached this point of legal threats and broken trust? Yet each time Nana alerted me to an oncoming seizure, 3 more times that week alone due to elevated stress, I was reminded of exactly what my parents had risked with their actions. This wasn't about choosing a service animal over family. It was about recognizing that my medical needs weren't optional luxuries to be sacrificed for financial convenience. By Friday afternoon, Catherine's demand letter was ready for my review. Reading the formal legal language describing my parents' actions made the situation feel simultaneously more real and more surreal. The letter established a 2-week deadline for response before we would proceed with formal legal action. As I authorized Catherine to send the letter by certified mail, I wondered how my family would react when confronted with the legal and financial reality of what they had done. Would they finally understand Nana's essential role in my life, or would this legal escalation destroy our relationship permanently? The certified letter arrived at my parents' house on Monday. By Monday evening, the real confrontation began. Dad called first, his voice oscillating between disbelief and indignation. A lawsuit? Against your own parents? After everything we've done for you. What exactly did you expect would happen when you stole my medical equipment? I asked, struggling to keep my voice level. Did you think I'd just accept it and move on? It's a dog, Melissa, not a wheelchair, he countered, the comparison revealing exactly how little he understood about Nana's function. We're drowning in medical bills. Your mother and I haven't had a vacation in 5 years. The second mortgage is killing us. You thought stealing my service animal while I slept was an acceptable solution to your financial problems, I finished for him. Did you consider what would happen if I had a seizure while driving without Nana's warning? Or fell in the shower? Or lost my job because I couldn't safely live independently? His silence suggested these considerations had never crossed his mind. The letter outlines exactly what Nana provides and what it would cost without her, I continued. Read it carefully. Then we can talk about reasonable solutions that don't involve endangering my life. Mom called next, tears evident in her voice. We never meant to hurt you, sweetie. We just didn't think it through. Your father's heart medication doubled in price. Jason needed help with his apartment deposit. Everything happened at once. The mention of Jason reignited my anger. So Jason's apartment deposit was more important than my safety? More important than the service animal that prevents me from having potentially fatal accidents? That's not fair, Mom protested weakly. Jason has his own struggles. His gambling addiction isn't a medical necessity, I said bluntly. That's what this comes down to. You chose to enable Jason's addiction over supporting my documented medical needs. The family intervention attempt came Wednesday evening. Grandma called to announce they were hosting a family dinner to work things out reasonably, without lawyers. Despite my reservations, I agreed to attend with one condition: Nana would accompany me. The gathering at my grandparents' house included my parents, Jason, and Patricia, and Uncle Robert. Nana stayed close by my side, occasionally scanning the room for potential threats, her training responding to the tension radiating from everyone present. Grandpa, always the family peacemaker, opened the discussion. We're here because we love Melissa and want to resolve the situation as a family. No one intended harm. Aunt Patricia, the only healthcare professional in the family, shook her head. Intent doesn't matter when it comes to patient safety. Removing a seizure alert service animal is like disconnecting someone's heart monitor because the beeping is annoying. Dad bristled. That's not a fair comparison. We were trying to make difficult financial decisions for the whole family. Then let's talk about those financial decisions, I suggested calmly. Let's discuss why Jason's gambling debts keep getting paid while my medical needs are considered optional expenses. The room fell silent. Jason stared at his plate while my parents exchanged panicked glances. That's private family business, Mom finally said. So is my medical care, I countered. But you made that public when you surrendered Nana to a shelter with a story about not being able to afford pets. Jason finally looked up. I didn't ask them to get rid of your dog. That wasn't my idea. Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. Not directly, no. But you did suggest we needed to cut unnecessary expenses. And you classified my seizure alert service dog as an unnecessary expense? I asked incredulously. We thought you could manage without her, Mom explained weakly. Your medication has been working better lately. It's been working better because Nana alerts me early enough to take emergency medication before seizures become severe, I explained for what felt like the 100th time. Without those early warnings, I'd likely be hospitalized multiple times monthly. Uncle Robert, who had remained quiet until now, leaned forward. Let's be practical about this. The lawyer's letter mentions significant financial damages. None of us want this to go to court, but these are serious allegations. Dad's face hardened. Is that what this is about? Money? After everything we've done for you. This is about recognition and respect, I corrected him. Recognition that Nana is essential medical equipment, not a pet. Respect for my right to live independently with appropriate accommodations for my disability. And if we can't afford these damages? Dad asked, making air quotes around the word. The letter outlines options, I said. Financial compensation is only one possibility. I'm also requesting a formal acknowledgement of Nana's status and a legally binding agreement not to interfere with my service animal again. This feels like extortion, Jason muttered. Aunt Patricia fixed him with a stern look. No, this is consequences. Actions have them. Taking someone's medically necessary service animal has legal and financial consequences. The conversation deteriorated from there. Mom cried. Dad made ultimatums. Jason alternated between defensiveness and accusation. Through it all, Nana remained alert at my side, occasionally pressing against my leg when my heart rate elevated, performing her job flawlessly despite the chaos around her. Finally, Dad issued his ultimatum. Drop this legal nonsense or consider yourself no longer part of this family. We won't be blackmailed by our own daughter. I stood slowly, gathering Nana's leash. I've brought documentation of every time Nana has alerted to seizures in the past month. 15 alerts, potentially 15 emergency room visits prevented. I've brought statements from my neurologist, my employer accommodations paperwork, and insurance coverage details explaining how Nana makes my independent living possible. I placed the folder on the table. Read these. Understand what Nana actually provides. Then consider what would have happened if I'd had a seizure while driving after you took her. I turned to leave, then paused. And understand this. Without Nana, I cannot work. Without work, I cannot pay rent. Without independent living, I would need to apply for disability benefits and subsidized housing. The financial support you occasionally provide would become full financial responsibility. The $100 monthly you thought you were saving on dog food would turn into thousands in necessary support. As Nana and I walked out, I delivered my own ultimatum. You have until the deadline in the letter to acknowledge your mistake and make it right. After that, this becomes a legal matter rather than a family one. The drive home was silent except for Nana's occasional comforting whine. I wondered if I'd just permanently severed my relationship with my family over what they still saw as just a dog. But every time I glanced at Nana, alert and watchful in the passenger seat, I was reminded of what was really at stake: my independence, safety, and dignity. 3 days after the disastrous family meeting, disaster struck in the form of my worst seizure in years. I was working from home, Nana resting beside my desk chair, when she suddenly became intensely alert. Her warning behavior was unusually urgent, pawing at my leg, whining sharply, and tugging at my sleeve toward the couch. The intensity suggested an oncoming seizure, more severe than usual. I barely had time to activate the seizure response function on my smartwatch, take emergency medication, and position myself safely before consciousness slipped away. What happened next I know only from medical reports and the smartwatch data. The seizure lasted over 4 minutes, dangerously long and classified as status epilepticus, a condition that can cause permanent brain damage or death if not promptly treated. Nana, trained for this worst-case scenario, activated my emergency response system by pressing the specialized button on my smart device with her paw, something she'd been trained to do only in severe situations. When paramedics arrived 7 minutes later, they found Nana performing her post-seizure protocols, keeping me on my side in recovery position, preventing me from injuring myself during the disoriented phase, and barking intermittently to attract attention from neighbors. I regained consciousness in the ambulance, confused and unable to speak coherently. Nana had been allowed to accompany me due to her service animal vest and the paramedics' recognition of her critical role. She lay pressed against me on the gurney, a constant familiar presence through the disorienting emergency. At the hospital, Dr. Patterson was called in as my neurologist. Her assessment was unequivocal. This seizure could have been fatal without the service animal's intervention. The emergency medication administered during the warning phase likely prevented brain damage, and the emergency response activation ensured timely medical intervention. She documented everything thoroughly, adding to the growing medical record supporting Nana's essential role. Without question, she wrote in my chart, the service animal's intervention was life-saving in this instance. During my overnight hospital stay for observation, my phone remained silent from family. No one had been notified of my hospitalization. I'd removed my parents from my emergency contacts after the shelter incident, replacing them with Rachel and Aunt Patricia. This silence felt both painful and validating. They remained unaware of how close I'd come to severe injury or death without Nana's intervention. The next morning, Dr. Patterson provided a detailed letter for my legal case. This incident conclusively demonstrates the life-saving function of your service animal, she explained. Any argument that the dog is merely a convenience or optional support is medically indefensible. Released from the hospital with instructions to rest and monitor for aftereffects, I returned home to find a certified letter from my parents' newly retained attorney. Rather than addressing the demands in my letter, they were preparing to contest the allegations, claiming they had partial ownership of Nana due to their contribution to the original fundraising campaign. The legal escalation felt inevitable but still painful. Catherine filed the formal lawsuit the following day, including the new medical documentation from my hospitalization. The filing included claims for conversion of property, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of disability protection laws. What I hadn't anticipated was media interest. A paralegal at Catherine's firm apparently mentioned the unusual case to a friend at the local newspaper. By week's end, a carefully worded article appeared. Local woman sues parents for surrendering $28,000 service dog to shelter. The article was factually accurate but necessarily simplified, focusing on the most sensational aspects of the case. It mentioned the fundraising campaign, the specialized training, and the shelter surrender, along with quotes from disability advocates about service animal protections under federal law. My phone exploded with notifications as the story spread from local news to disability advocacy networks. The National Epilepsy Foundation reached out offering legal support. Service dog training organizations contacted Catherine about providing expert testimony. My inbox filled with messages from other people with disabilities sharing similar stories of family members not understanding or respecting their accommodations. The publicity had an unexpected effect on my parents. Dad called for the first time since our confrontation, his voice subdued. "The newspaper makes us sound like monsters," he said quietly. "The newspaper reported facts," I replied, too exhausted from my recent hospitalization for anger. "You took my medical equipment without consent and surrendered it to a shelter. Those are simply facts." "Your mother hasn't stopped crying since the article came out," he continued. "Her principal called her in for a meeting. People at church are asking questions. This isn't just between us anymore." For the first time, I heard genuine regret rather than defensiveness in his voice. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he admitted. "We were desperate. The second mortgage, Jason's, issues. Everything was collapsing at once. So you sacrificed my safety?" I stated simply. His silence was answer enough. Later that day, Catherine called with news. "Your parents' attorney reached out about potential settlement discussions," she reported. "Also, I received a concerning call from their mortgage company. Apparently, they've leveraged their house to pay legal fees and are facing potential foreclosure." The financial reality I'd warned about was materializing faster than expected. My parents had committed not just a moral error, but a financially catastrophic one. Fighting this lawsuit could cost them their home, retirement savings, and financial stability. The breaking point came 2 days later. Jason showed up at my apartment unannounced, looking haggard and unusually humble. "Can we talk?" he asked from the doorway, eyeing Nana warily where she stood protectively at my side. I allowed him in but maintained distance, Nana positioning herself between us as she'd been trained to do with people who triggered stress responses in me. "I need to tell you something," Jason began, sinking onto the edge of my couch. "Something Mom and Dad don't want anyone to know." He took a deep breath. "I have a gambling problem. Not just occasional betting, a full-blown addiction. I've lost over $60,000 in the past 2 years. Mom and Dad have been covering my debts, paying my rent when I couldn't, bailing me out repeatedly. Though I'd suspected this, hearing the confirmation still shocked me. And they chose to keep enabling your addiction while eliminating my medical support?" He nodded miserably. "They didn't see it as addiction until recently. They thought they were helping their son through temporary struggles. The weekend they took your dog, I just confessed to them about a $12,000 debt to some very dangerous people. So they panicked and decided Nana was an unnecessary expense, I concluded. It sounds awful saying it out loud, Jason admitted. I never specifically suggested getting rid of your service dog, but I did keep emphasizing how desperate my situation was. I manipulated them, played on their parental instincts. He looked up, finally meeting my eyes. The lawsuit is going to ruin them financially. They've mortgaged everything, borrowed from their retirement accounts. Dad's talking about declaring bankruptcy. The moment of truth crystallized with painful clarity. My parents were on the verge of financial ruin, partly from enabling Jason's addiction, partly from medical expenses, and now from legal fees fighting a battle they couldn't win. And Jason, for the first time, was acknowledging his role in the family's dysfunction. What do you want from me? I asked quietly. Nothing I deserve, he replied. But Mom and Dad are asking if you'd consider meeting at the hospital tomorrow. Just talking, with Dr. Patterson present as a neutral medical authority. No lawyers. I considered refusing, protecting myself from further manipulation. But beneath the anger and hurt remained the complicated love of family, imperfect, sometimes toxic, but still the people who had shaped my life. I'll think about it, I said finally. But I need something from you first. Anything, Jason promised quickly. Call your gambling helpline right now, from my apartment, where I can hear you. Make an appointment with a counselor. Then show me confirmation. His face registered surprise, followed by resignation. He pulled out his phone, searched for the National Gambling Addiction Hotline, and made the call right there in my living room. 20 minutes later, he had an appointment with a counselor and had registered for a support group. It's a start, I acknowledged. Tell Mom and Dad I'll meet them tomorrow. But Nana comes with me, Dr. Patterson will be present, and I'm not dropping the lawsuit without significant changes from all of you. As Jason left, I wondered whether this family crisis might finally force the changes we'd all needed for years: accountability for Jason, financial reality for my parents, and recognition of my medical needs as non-negotiable necessities. The lawsuit had pushed us to the breaking point, but perhaps that's where healing could finally begin. The hospital conference room felt neutral and clinical, an appropriate setting for the difficult conversation ahead. Dr. Patterson had arranged for us to use the Epilepsy Center's family counseling space, complete with comfortable chairs and privacy. My parents arrived looking diminished somehow. Dad's confident posture had collapsed into a weary stoop. Mom's usually perfect appearance showed signs of neglect. Unpainted nails, minimal makeup, clothing chosen for comfort rather than appearance. Jason accompanied them, standing slightly apart as if unsure of his welcome in this fragile peace negotiation. Nana settled beside my chair in her working position, alert but calm. Dr. Patterson sat at the head of the small conference table, medical files open before her, embodying professional neutrality. Thank you all for coming, she began. I've agreed to facilitate this discussion at Melissa's request, but I want to be clear that my primary concern is her medical well-being. With that said, I believe family support is an important component of managing any chronic condition. Dad cleared his throat. Before anything else, I need to say something. He looked directly at me for the first time since entering. We were wrong. Completely, inexcusably wrong. What we did endangered your life, violated your rights, and betrayed your trust. There's no justification, only context. The simple acknowledgement, delivered without defensiveness or qualification, loosened something tight in my chest. Mom reached across the table, stopping just short of touching my hand. We've read everything: the medical records, the service dog certification, the financial breakdowns. We didn't understand, truly. We saw Nana as a pet, an emotional support, but not as essential medical equipment. The seizure reports were. Dad's voice cracked. Knowing how close you came to serious injury or worse, and that we contributed to that risk. I'll never forgive myself. Jason spoke next. I've been in counseling for 3 days. Not nearly enough, but enough to recognize how my addiction affected everyone. I manipulated mom and dad, created financial crises, then let the consequences fall on you. Dr. Patterson nodded appreciatively. Acknowledgement is the first step. Now we need to discuss practical solutions and protections moving forward. I'd prepared for this moment, consulting with both Catherine and Sandra about reasonable terms for potential settlement. I have 3 non-negotiable conditions, I stated calmly. First, legal recognition of Nana's status as medical equipment and a binding agreement never to interfere with my service animal again. My parents nodded immediately. Second, family education. All of you will complete the Service Animal Handler Family Training Program at the Epilepsy Foundation. It's 6 sessions that explain exactly what Nana does, how she works, and legal protections for service animals. We'll do it, Mom agreed quickly. Third, Jason's recovery becomes a family priority equal to my medical management. I turned to my brother. That means addiction counseling, gambling restriction apps on your devices, financial transparency, and no more bailouts that compromise anyone's health or safety. Jason swallowed hard. I've already started. I've given Mom and Dad complete access to my bank accounts, installed blocking software, and scheduled therapy 3 times weekly. Dad added, we've frozen our credit, changed all financial passwords, and contacted a financial advisor specializing in addiction recovery. We're learning to stop enabling. These were positive steps, but I needed to address the lawsuit directly. These conditions address future behavior, but there's still the matter of legal consequences for what already happened. Mom's eyes filled with tears. We'll accept whatever financial penalties are required. The house is already mortgaged to the limit, but we can sell it, access retirement funds early. That's not what I want, I interrupted. Financial devastation won't help any of us. I've discussed alternative settlement terms with my attorney. I outlined the agreement Catherine had helped draft. My parents would make a modest monthly payment toward a medical trust for my ongoing care. Jason would perform community service hours at the Service Dog Training Center where Nana had been trained. Most importantly, they would participate in creating educational materials for families about service animal rights and responsibilities. This isn't about punishment, I explained. It's about ensuring this doesn't happen to someone else's service animal because their family didn't understand. The relief on their faces was palpable. Dad reached for his wallet, extracting a folded document. We've already started, he said, passing me the paper. It's a notarized statement acknowledging Nana's status as medical equipment and our commitment to respecting disability accommodations. We had our attorney draft it yesterday. The document represented a first step, small but significant. It showed initiative rather than mere compliance, suggesting genuine commitment to change. Dr. Patterson smiled slightly. I believe we have the foundation for moving forward. Melissa, are you comfortable with these initial steps? I nodded, feeling the weight of anger beginning to lighten. I'll have Catherine draw up formal settlement terms. But yes, this is a start. The legal resolution came together over the following weeks. Catherine worked with my parents' attorney to create a settlement agreement that protected my rights without financially destroying my family. The financial obligations were manageable, a small monthly payment into a medical trust for future care needs. The educational requirements were more substantial. Family therapy focusing on disability understanding, community service hours, and participation in creating a guide for families of service animal handlers. More difficult was rebuilding personal relationships after such fundamental betrayal. The first family dinner after this settlement felt awkward and strained. Mom hovered anxiously, constantly checking if I needed anything. Dad maintained careful distance from Nana, as if afraid even approaching her might violate some agreement. Jason sat quietly, 30-day sobriety chip from Gamblers Anonymous turning constantly between his fingers. Nana, sensing the tension, stayed in working mode rather than relaxing, as she typically would in familiar environments. Her hypervigilance reflected my own. Trust, once broken, couldn't be instantly restored by legal documents or verbal apologies. The family therapy sessions proved surprisingly valuable. Led by a counselor specializing in families affected by chronic medical conditions, they created space for difficult conversations about disability perceptions, financial boundaries, and rebuilding trust. My parents began to understand the daily realities of living with epilepsy. I gained insight into their financial anxieties and the manipulation they'd experienced from Jason's addiction. I think what happened, the therapist observed during our fourth session, was a perfect storm of misunderstanding, financial fear, and enabling patterns. You all lost sight of what was truly essential versus what was comfortable or convenient. Jason's recovery became an unexpected avenue for family healing. His commitment to gambling addiction treatment revealed a determination none of us had witnessed before. When he began volunteer work at the Service Dog Training Center, initially as part of his settlement obligations, but continuing long after his required hours were completed, he developed genuine appreciation for the animal's capabilities. I watched a dog alert to a blood sugar drop 30 minutes before the handler's monitor detected it, he told me with astonishment after one volunteer shift. It wasn't training or tricks. These animals are performing medical miracles. 6 months after the shelter incident, my parents sold their oversized family home, not due to financial necessity as initially feared, but as a conscious choice to downsize into a more manageable property. The excess from the sale went partly toward Jason's gambling debts and partly into my medical trust. We should have done this years ago, Mom admitted as we packed photo albums in their living room. We kept trying to maintain appearances while everything crumbled underneath. The house became more important than the people living in it. The educational materials we created together became unexpectedly impactful. What began as a settlement obligation evolved into a passion project, a comprehensive guide for families of service animal handlers explaining legal protections, proper interactions, and the critical distinction between pets and working animals. Several disability advocacy organizations adopted the materials for their websites, and the local school district implemented them in staff training. As months passed, Nana and I settled into a new relationship with my family. Trust rebuilt slowly, in small moments of respect and understanding. Dad began carrying backup supplies for Nana in his car, her special food, extra medication, spare service vest. Mom stopped referring to her as the dog and used her name instead, acknowledging her working status. Jason asked appropriate questions about her training and capabilities, genuinely interested rather than dismissive. At the 1-year mark after the incident, we gathered for a quiet celebration of progress. Not perfect healing. The scars remained visible in moments of hesitation or careful phrasing, but genuine growth nonetheless. I've been thinking about what this experience taught me, I said as we finished dinner. Initially, I thought it was about standing up for myself, demanding respect for my medical needs. Dad nodded encouragingly. But the deeper lesson was about communication and education, I continued. You didn't understand what Nana truly provides because I never fully explained it. I assumed this certification and training would speak for themselves. We should have asked better questions, Mom acknowledged. Instead of seeing the cost, we should have seen the value. Jason, now 14 months sober from gambling, added his perspective. I've learned that addiction makes you completely self-centered. I couldn't see beyond my own needs, so I certainly couldn't recognize yours. As Nana rested her head on my lap, no longer in constant working mode around my family, I reflected on our journey. The legal battle had been necessary but insufficient for true healing. The harder work had been rebuilding trust, establishing boundaries, and creating understanding. There's something powerful in learning to advocate for your needs without destroying relationships in the process, I observed. It's a balance I'm still figuring out. Dad reached across the table, gently squeezing my hand. We're learning together. That's what family should be. The betrayal would always remain part of our history. The note, "Gave Nana to shelter. Can't afford pets when family needs help with bills," was seared into my memory. But alongside it now existed new moments. Dad researching epilepsy management techniques, Mom attending service dog demonstration events, Jason volunteering weekends at the training center. Healing wasn't forgetting or pretending the harm never occurred. It was building something new on the foundation of hard lessons and genuine accountability. It was recognizing that sometimes the people who hurt us most can also become our strongest advocates once they truly understand. As I watch Nana sleeping peacefully beside me now, no longer vigilant around my family, I realize that true healing happens when protection no longer requires constant defense. The boundaries remain, but the walls between us have slowly lowered, allowing connection without compromising safety. Have you ever had to make difficult choices between family loyalty and self-protection? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest part of any journey is knowing when to draw boundaries and when to offer second chances. If my story resonated with you, please subscribe and share with someone who might need to hear that advocating for your needs isn't selfish. It's essential. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the most profound healing begins with the word no. I'm Samantha, 34 years old, and throughout my life, I've been the responsible one while my brother Jason basked in the golden child glow. When our father died, I expected fairness after years of supporting our family. Instead, at the will reading, my parents left everything to Jason. "Your brother deserves it," my mother said coldly, watching my world crumble. The ultimate irony? 1 month later, her text lit up my phone. "The mortgage is due." While I gather my thoughts to share how this inheritance betrayal unfolded, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and subscribe to follow my journey. You won't believe how I transformed this family crisis into the most valuable lesson we've ever learned. Growing up in suburban Chicago, my childhood looked picture perfect from the outside. Our modest 2-story home with the white picket fence housed what neighbors called that nice family: my father Richard, a dedicated accountant at a mid-sized firm, my mother Diana, a third-grade teacher at the local elementary school, my brother Jason, 3 years my senior, and me. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable in our middle-class existence, with annual summer vacations to Wisconsin and Christmas mornings that were always generous, if not extravagant. But within those walls, a subtle dynamic took root early. Jason, with his outgoing personality and athletic build, captured our parents' attention in a way my quieter, more studious nature never could. I noticed it first in elementary school when Jason's C+ in math warranted celebration and ice cream because he really tried this time, while my straight A report card received a cursory glance and a distracted, "That's what we expect from you, Samantha." By middle school, the pattern was firmly established. I still remember sitting at our kitchen table, hands shaking with excitement as I showed my father my perfect SAT score. He nodded, said "good job," and returned to his newspaper. 2 weeks later, when Jason's college acceptance letter arrived, despite his thoroughly average grades, my parents threw a party, inviting extended family and friends to celebrate their son's achievement. I learned to find validation elsewhere, in teachers' praise, in scholarship offers, in the quiet satisfaction of academic excellence. But I never stopped craving my parents' recognition, their pride, their simple acknowledgement that I too was worthy of celebration. Everything changed when I was 16. My father collapsed in our living room one Sunday afternoon, clutching his chest. While my mother froze and Jason panicked, I calmly called 911, described the symptoms to the dispatcher, and even remembered to grab my father's medication list before the ambulance arrived. The heart attack was severe but not fatal, and during his recovery, I stepped up in ways no teenager should have to, managing household bills, cooking meals, helping my mother navigate insurance paperwork. "I don't know what we'd do without you, Samantha," my mother said one evening, and for a moment, I felt seen. But as soon as my father recovered, the old patterns reasserted themselves, and Jason once again became the center of the family universe. When college decisions came around, I had my pick of prestigious universities with substantial scholarship offers. But my father's health remained precarious, and my mother's worried glances told me what she wouldn't say aloud. They needed me close. So I chose the University of Chicago, just a 30-minute train ride from home, turning down Cornell and Yale. Jason, meanwhile, attended an expensive out-of-state university, his tuition straining the family finances despite his mediocre grades. I majored in business with a focus on finance, working part-time throughout college to minimize my student loans while maintaining a 3.9 GPA. After graduation, I secured a position at a respected financial firm and began my steady climb through the corporate ranks. My financial stability became a resource for my family. When my mother needed unexpected dental surgery costing $8,000, I covered it without hesitation. When the family home needed a new roof and heating system, I provided the $12,000 loan that my parents never quite managed to repay. Meanwhile, Jason bounced from job to job, each one beginning with enthusiasm that quickly faded when the work became challenging or monotonous. He started a graphic design business that folded within 6 months, then an app development company that never launched a single product, then a sports memorabilia shop that hemorrhaged money for 2 years before closing. After each failure, he would retreat to our parents' home, where my mother would console him with home-cooked meals and reassurances that the right opportunity just hasn't come along yet. By my early 30s, I had risen to vice president of financial operations at a thriving tech company. My relationship with my partner Alex provided the support and recognition I'd always craved. Alex saw the toxic family dynamic with the clarity of an outsider and gently encouraged me to establish healthier boundaries with my parents and Jason. "They take advantage of you," Alex would say after I'd spend hours on the phone helping my parents navigate their retirement accounts or advising Jason on yet another business idea. "They expect everything from you and nothing from him." I knew Alex was right, but family loyalty runs deep. When my company offered me a promotion that required relocating to Boston, I took it with a mix of excitement and guilt. The 6-hour drive from Boston to Chicago meant I couldn't drop everything to solve family problems at a moment's notice, but I still made the trip at least once a month, prioritizing my family over my own comfort and convenience. The distance helped me gain perspective, but it also created space for Jason to spin narratives about my absence, my success, my priorities. I didn't realize just how effectively he'd been painting me as the villain in my own family story until it was too late. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October. I was preparing for a quarterly budget presentation when my phone lit up with my mother's name. "Your father's had a stroke," she said, her voice thin and brittle. "It's bad, Samantha. The doctors are saying, they're saying we should prepare ourselves." I didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way," I promised, already emailing my team about a family emergency. Within 2 hours, I'd booked a flight, packed a bag, and arranged to work remotely for as long as necessary. The entire flight to Chicago, I clutched my armrests, silently bargaining with the universe to keep my father alive until I could reach him. When I arrived at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, my mother sat alone in the waiting room, her face drawn and pale. "Where's Jason?" I asked, setting down my suitcase. "He's coming," she said vaguely. "He has some work things to wrap up first." I swallowed my frustration and focused on what needed to be done. My father lay unconscious in the ICU, surrounded by beeping machines and snaking tubes. The neurologist explained the situation in gentle but unflinching terms. The stroke had caused massive bleeding in his brain, and even if he survived, severe disability was likely. For the next 48 hours, I barely left the hospital. I took detailed notes during doctor consultations, asked informed questions about treatment options, and made sure my mother ate and rested. I called my father's insurance company to verify coverage, spoke with the hospital social worker about potential rehabilitation facilities, and began researching stroke recovery resources. Jason finally arrived 3 days after the stroke, offering vague excuses about client meetings and project deadlines, despite the fact that I knew from my mother that he was currently between jobs. He spent his hospital visits scrolling through his phone or stepping out for important calls, leaving me to continue managing the medical decisions and supporting our mother. As days stretched into a week, it became clear that my father's condition wasn't improving. The doctors recommended transitioning to comfort care, and after an agonizing family discussion, we agreed. I arranged for hospice services, ensuring my father would have dignified, pain-free care in his final days. In a rare moment of consciousness, my father squeezed my hand and whispered something I couldn't quite hear. When I leaned closer, he said, "Always so capable," with what might have been a smile. Those 3 words felt like a precious gift, an acknowledgement of all I'd done and been for our family. 2 days later, with both Jason and me at his bedside, our father took his final breath. In that moment of profound loss, the sibling rivalry and parental favoritism seemed petty and irrelevant. We were just 2 children saying goodbye to their father, united in grief. The unity didn't last long. As the initial shock subsided, practical matters required attention. I contacted the funeral home, chose a casket my father would have appreciated for its understated elegance, and worked with my mother to write the obituary. The funeral costs came to just over $15,000, which I paid up front, with Jason promising to reimburse me for his share once he was more stable financially, a promise I knew from experience would likely go unfulfilled. In the days following the funeral, my mother leaned heavily on me, both emotionally and practically. I helped her notify banks, insurance companies, and government agencies of my father's death. I organized his personal belongings, helped my mother sort through his clothes for donation, and listened to her reminisce about their 42 years of marriage. Meanwhile, Jason made occasional appearances, offering hugs and platitudes before disappearing again, claiming he needed space to process his grief. I didn't begrudge him his coping mechanism. We all grieve differently, but the uneven distribution of responsibilities felt all too familiar. 2 weeks after the funeral, we gathered at my parents' longtime attorney's office for the reading of the will. I expected a straightforward division of assets, perhaps the family home to my mother, with investment accounts and personal possessions split between Jason and me. Or, given my financial stability compared to Jason's perpetual struggles, perhaps a slightly larger share for him. What I never anticipated was what actually happened. The attorney, Mr. Levinson, who had handled my parents' legal affairs for decades, seemed uncomfortable as he adjusted his glasses and began to read. My mother sat unnaturally still beside me, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I, Richard Clark, being of sound mind, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, Mr. Levinson read, proceeding through the standard legal preamble before reaching the critical section. I leave all property, assets, and possessions to my son, Jason Clark. The words didn't register at first. I waited for the continuation, and to my daughter Samantha, I leave, but it never came. Just a few more legal clauses, instructions for executing the will, and then silence. There must be some mistake, I finally said, looking between the attorney and my mother. What about me? My mother's expression hardened in a way I'd never seen before. Your brother deserves it, she said coldly. He's always struggled while you've done well for yourself. The room seemed to tilt as the implications sank in. Everything, the family home valued at approximately $575,000, my father's investment portfolio worth around $250,000. His meticulously maintained collection of classic cars worth at least $180,000, all of it now belonged to Jason. I opened my mouth to protest, to remind them of the loans I'd provided, the support I'd given, the sacrifices I'd made. But the words died in my throat as I saw the satisfied smile playing at the corners of Jason's mouth. This wasn't a mistake or an oversight. This was the culmination of a lifetime of family dynamics, the final confirmation of what I had always feared, but never fully accepted. In my parents' eyes, Jason's needs would always outweigh my contributions. Mr. Levinson shuffled his papers awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with the tension filling his office. "There are some papers to sign," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Mrs. Clark, if you could." I sat in stunned silence as my mother signed document after document, making official what still felt impossible. The entirety of my father's estate, everything he and my mother had built over decades of marriage, now belonged solely to my brother, with not so much as a keepsake set aside for me. The drive back to my hotel passed in a blur. Traffic lights changed, other cars moved around me, but I was operating on autopilot, my mind still trapped in that moment when I realized I had been completely written out of my father's will. Not just overlooked, but deliberately excluded. As soon as I reached my room, I called Alex. The moment I heard that familiar voice, the dam broke. "They left everything to Jason," I sobbed, the words barely coherent. "Everything. The house, the investments, Dad's cars. Like I don't even exist." "Oh, Sam," Alex whispered, the shock evident even across hundreds of miles. I don't even have words." "Did they explain why?" "Mom said Jason deserves it because he's always struggled and I'm successful." I managed between shaky breaths. "As if being responsible and hardworking is a reason to be punished." "That's beyond unfair," Alex said, anger creeping into his tone. "After everything you've done for them? All the money you've loaned them? All the times you've dropped everything to help." The conversation continued for over an hour, Alex alternating between outrage on my behalf and attempts to comfort me. But nothing could ease the profound sense of betrayal that had settled like a stone in my chest. The next morning, I drove to my childhood home, now legally Jason's home, to collect my suitcase before flying back to Boston. I found him in the kitchen with his girlfriend Brittany, already discussing renovation plans. "We're thinking of knocking down this wall," he said, gesturing expansively, not even acknowledging my red-rimmed eyes or the obvious signs that I'd spent the night crying. "Open concept is really the way to go these days." "Where's Mom?" I asked, ignoring his remodeling ambitions. "She's moving her things into the guest room," he replied casually. "Britt and I are taking the master bedroom." "Makes sense since it's our house now." The casual cruelty of that statement, "our house now," struck me like a physical blow. This home had been in our family for 30 years. I had learned to ride a bike in the driveway, done homework at the kitchen table, celebrated birthdays and holidays within these walls. And now Jason was treating it like a property he'd purchased, with our mother relegated to guest status in her own home. I left without engaging further, afraid of what I might say if I opened my mouth. The flight back to Boston felt interminable, and when I finally reached my apartment, I moved through the following days in a fog of disbelief and hurt. A week after returning to Boston, I received a call from Eleanor Patterson, my mother's closest friend since college and something of an aunt figure to me growing up. "I just wanted to check on you, sweetheart," she said. "This whole situation seems, well, I was surprised, to say the least." "You and me both," I replied dryly. There was a pause before Eleanor continued, her voice lowered as if sharing a confidence. "You should know. Jason has been in your parents' ears for years, telling them you're too busy for family, that you only care about your career, that you've outgrown them." My stomach dropped. "What? That's not true. I call every week. I visit monthly despite living hundreds of miles away." "I know that, dear. But Jason has been very persuasive. He told them you refused to visit last Christmas because you were too busy with work." The accusation was laughable. I had spent Christmas Day with my parents, bringing expensive gifts and cooking the entire holiday meal while Jason showed up 3 hours late with unwrapped gift cards. But the seed of understanding was planted. Jason had been actively working to alienate me from our parents, painting himself as the devoted son and me as the uncaring daughter. That night, I called Jason directly, something I rarely did, preferring to communicate through our mother to avoid conflict. "Why would you tell Mom and Dad I refused to visit last Christmas?" I demanded when he answered. "What?" "I never said that," he replied, but the slight hesitation before his denial told me everything. "Eleanor told me everything, Jason. How you've been poisoning them against me for years." He dropped the pretense with surprising speed. "Look, you don't need the inheritance," he snapped. "You've got your fancy job and your perfect life in Boston. Mom and Dad knew I need the help more than you do. I've been helping them financially for years." I protested. "I paid for Mom's surgery, the new roof, the car repairs." "Yeah, because you can afford it," he interrupted. "Some of us haven't had all your advantages." The conversation devolved from there, with Jason eventually hanging up on me after accusing me of being selfish and materialistic for even questioning the will. The irony was almost too much to bear. Over the following weeks, I watched via social media as Jason transformed our family home. He posted photos of my father's meticulously organized study being converted into a gaming room, the built-in bookshelves that had housed my father's beloved history books now holding gaming consoles and action figures. My mother, meanwhile, became increasingly distant. My weekly calls went to voicemail more often than not, and when we did speak, her responses were perfunctory and vague. The birthday card she had sent without fail every year since I left for college didn't arrive, another small wound in an already bleeding heart. Then, exactly 4 weeks after the will reading, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "The mortgage payment is due. We need $3,200 by Friday." I stared at the message in confusion. My parents had purchased their home in the early 90s with a 30-year mortgage. By my calculation, it should have been fully paid off 3 years ago. I called my mother immediately. "What mortgage?" I asked when she answered. "I thought the house was paid off." A long silence followed before she reluctantly explained. "We took out a new mortgage 3 years ago. There were some expenses." "What kind of expenses require a $450,000 mortgage on a house that was almost paid off?" I pressed. Another lengthy pause. "I can't discuss this now. But we need the payment by Friday or the bank will start sending notices." The conversation ended without resolution, but it planted a devastating suspicion in my mind. The inheritance that had been so cruelly denied to me wasn't wealth at all. It was debt and financial obligations that Jason had likely never bothered to investigate before smugly accepting his fortunate position. The revelation about the mortgage was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, through tense phone calls with my increasingly desperate mother, I uncovered the true state of my parents' finances and, by extension, Jason's inheritance. The second mortgage on the house was just the tip of the iceberg. There were also credit card debts totaling nearly $65,000, a personal loan from my father's brother, and various other financial obligations that my parents had accumulated over the years, primarily to support Jason's series of failed businesses and personal expenses. Jason, confronted with this reality, reacted with characteristic self-centeredness. "I thought I was getting a free house," he complained during a 3-way call with our mother. No one said anything about having to make payments. As mortgage payments went unmade, the bank began sending foreclosure warnings. My mother's voicemails became increasingly frantic. "Samantha, please, we're family. You have to help us out." The irony of being excluded from the will, but expected to shoulder the financial burdens, wasn't lost on me. Still, concern for my mother, who would be homeless if the house were foreclosed upon, led me to consult with a financial advisor about the situation. The meeting revealed even more troubling information. My advisor, after reviewing the documents I'd gathered, explained that my parents had been systematically liquidating their retirement accounts and investments over the past decade. Based on these withdrawals, I'd estimate they've taken out nearly $300,000 in the past 8 years, she explained, pointing to a chart showing the declining account values. And these penalties for early withdrawal suggest they were using retirement funds, which is particularly concerning. When I pressed my mother on these findings, she finally broke down and admitted the truth. Your father and I helped Jason start his restaurant, she said, referring to a failed venture from 5 years prior that I'd been told was funded by investors. It needed more capital than expected, $280,000 more. The revelation stunned me. My financially prudent father, who had lectured me about saving and investing since I was old enough to have an allowance, had decimated his retirement fund to pour money into Jason's ill-conceived business idea, a theme restaurant based around sports trivia that had closed within 18 months. That night, alone in my Boston apartment, I finally allowed myself to face the full truth of my family dynamic. I'd spent my entire life being punished for my competence, my success weaponized against me while Jason was rewarded for his failures. I had been the family bank, the emergency responder, the reliable one, all while being painted as uncaring and selfish behind my back. Alex found me on the kitchen floor, surrounded by financial documents, crying harder than I had since my father's death. I've been such a fool, I sobbed as Alex held me. I kept thinking if I just did enough, gave enough, they'd finally see me. It's not your fault, Alex said firmly. You've been manipulated by experts your entire life. Your brother created a narrative that served him, and your parents chose to believe it because it was easier than acknowledging their own favoritism. The next day, I initiated a family conference call, determined to address the situation head-on. But my attempt at a rational discussion about financial responsibility quickly devolved when Jason began making accusations about my abandonment of the family. You moved to Boston for your precious career, he shouted. You've always put yourself first. That's not fair, I countered, struggling to maintain my composure. I've provided financial support for years. I paid for Mom's surgery, the roof repairs. Oh. Here we go with the martyr routine, Jason interrupted. Just because you have money doesn't make you a better person. Brittany, surprisingly, broke in with an unexpected revelation. Jason, stop it. Just tell them the truth. When he remained silent, she continued, Jason has gambling debts. That's why he can't help with the mortgage. He owes people money. The revelation hung in the air for a long moment before my mother responded with words that cut deeper than anything that had come before. We knew you could take care of yourself, Samantha. Jason needs us. In that moment, the truth crystallized with painful clarity. I had been punished for my competence, my independence, my success. The child who needed less had been given less love, less support, less recognition, and ultimately no inheritance, precisely because I had proven I could survive without it. The following weekend, I flew to Chicago one last time to collect personal items from my childhood home. What I found shattered what little was left of my familial illusions. My bedroom had been converted into a storage space, boxes stacked haphazardly where my bed had once stood. When I asked about my childhood mementos, photographs, yearbooks, the journals I'd kept since middle school, my mother vaguely mentioned that they might have been donated during a cleaning spree. In the garage, I discovered the truth. My academic trophies, certificates, and awards had been discarded in a garbage bin, while Jason's participation ribbons and youth sports memorabilia were carefully preserved in labeled containers. The final blow came when I flipped through the family photo albums displayed on the living room bookshelf. My college graduation photos, where I had graduated summa cum laude with dual degrees, had been removed, replaced by pictures of Jason's wedding to his first wife, a marriage that had lasted less than 2 years. Standing in that house, surrounded by physical evidence of how thoroughly I had been erased from the family narrative, something broke in me, and something else, stronger and clearer, took its place. I returned to Boston with a new resolve. Instead of reacting emotionally, I gave myself a full week to reflect and plan. This wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about finally establishing the boundaries I should have set years ago. My first step was consulting with a therapist who specialized in family dynamics. Dr. Melissa Patterson listened to my story with compassionate professionalism before offering her assessment. What you're describing is a classic golden child/scapegoat dynamic, she explained. Families often unconsciously assign these roles, and they can persist well into adulthood. Your brother was cast as the one who needed protection and support, while you were expected to be self-sufficient. But why? I asked, the question that had haunted me for decades. Why him and not me? Sometimes it's because one child reminds a parent of themselves or their own unresolved issues, she replied. Often, the more naturally capable child gets less attention precisely because they need less intervention. It's not fair, but it's common. With Dr. Patterson's guidance, I began to understand that no amount of achievement or support would ever change how my family saw me. The roles had been assigned long ago, and my parents and Jason were too invested in maintaining them to acknowledge the truth. My next consultation was with an attorney who confirmed I had no legal obligation to provide financial support to my mother or Jason, regardless of our blood relationship. Familial moral obligations and legal obligations are entirely separate matters, she explained. You're not legally responsible for the debts associated with a property you don't own. Armed with this knowledge, I undertook a detailed accounting of all the financial support I had provided to my family over the years. Bank statements, canceled checks, and money transfer receipts revealed a staggering total. $178,000 over 15 years, not including countless flights to Chicago, gifts, and other uncounted contributions. I researched family systems therapy, enabling behavior, and financial boundaries. I read books about adult children of emotionally immature parents and joined online forums where others shared similar experiences of family financial exploitation. With this foundation of understanding, I drafted a formal email to both my mother and Jason, clearly outlining my position. I explained that while I cared for them both, I would no longer be providing financial support of any kind. I included an abbreviated accounting of my previous contributions and expressed that I felt these had been neither recognized nor reciprocated. I set up an automatic response to any messages containing financial requests, politely reiterating my boundary and suggesting community resources that might provide assistance. And then I made the most difficult decision of all. I would take a 3-month break from all communication with my family to focus on my own healing. The decision wasn't made lightly, and the aftermath wasn't easy. My body seemed to process the grief my mind had been avoiding. I developed insomnia, lost weight without trying, and experienced anxiety attacks for the first time in my life. But I also began to heal in ways I hadn't thought possible. I joined a support group for adult children of emotionally immature parents, where I found understanding from others who had walked similar paths. For the first time, I could speak openly about my experiences without fear of judgment or dismissal. The first time I received a financial request from my mother after setting my boundary was a test of my resolve. Her message was carefully crafted to trigger my guilt. The property tax is due, and I don't know what I'll do if we lose the house. Please, Samantha. In the past, I would have immediately transferred the money, seeking that elusive maternal approval. Instead, I took a deep breath and replied simply, I'm not able to help with that expense. No explanation, no apology, no justification, just a clear, firm boundary. Jason's response to my new boundaries was predictable: escalation. He began having relatives call me, each one armed with a script about saving the family home and your poor mother. To each one, I responded calmly, sometimes sharing documentation of my years of financial support, sometimes simply stating, I understand your concern, but this is between my immediate family and me. Rather than leaving my mother without resources, I researched and compiled information about financial assistance programs for seniors in her area. I connected her with a local senior services organization that could help her explore housing options within her budget. I wasn't abandoning her. I was helping her find sustainable solutions rather than temporary band-aids. As word of the inheritance situation spread through our extended family, unexpected allies emerged. My father's brother Michael, who had always seemed to favor Jason, called me out of the blue. "I want you to know," he said gruffly, "that your father told me about the will before he died." I told him it wasn't right, but he said your mother had convinced him it was for the best. I should have pushed harder, and I'm sorry for that. His acknowledgement of the unfairness, while it couldn't change the situation, helped validate my feelings and experiences. I wasn't crazy or selfish for feeling betrayed. The betrayal was real. Throughout this period, my company proved unexpectedly supportive. When I finally explained the situation to my manager and requested to use some of my accumulated vacation time for self-care, she not only approved it immediately but shared her own experience with family financial manipulation. "Take the time you need," she said. "Your work will be here when you're ready, and so will we." That 3-week break became a turning point in my recovery. I spent time hiking in the Vermont mountains, journaling, and reconnecting with friends I'd neglected while prioritizing my family's needs. I began to rediscover who I was outside of the family-assigned role of provider and problem solver. Most importantly, I began to recognize my own worth separate from family approval or validation. 3 months into my communication break, I received a message from a family friend informing me that my childhood home was now in pre-foreclosure. Jason, facing his own financial pressures and gambling debts, had moved out, leaving our mother alone in a house she couldn't afford. My first instinct was to swoop in and fix everything, pay the mortgage, cover the back taxes, rescue my mother from the consequences of decades of financial mismanagement. It was the role I had played my entire adult life, after all. Instead, I took the information to my next therapy session, where Dr. Patterson helped me work through my conflicted feelings. "You can have compassion for your mother without taking responsibility for her situation," she reminded me. "There's a difference between supporting someone and enabling them." The next day, my mother called. For the first time in our adult relationship, I heard something new in her voice: humility. "I know you said you needed space," she began hesitantly. "But the house. Jason left, and the bank says." Her voice broke. "I think I've made some terrible mistakes, Samantha." I maintained my boundary while acknowledging her pain. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Mom. I can't help financially, but I'm willing to talk through options with you if you'd like." The following weekend, I flew to Chicago, not to write a check, but to have an honest conversation. We sat at the kitchen table where I'd done homework, where I'd shown my perfect SAT score, where I'd learned that achievement would never be enough to secure my place in the family. "Why?" I asked simply. "Why did you and Dad leave everything to Jason and nothing to me?" She started with the familiar justifications. Jason needed help. I was successful on my own. But as I calmly pointed out the flaws in each argument, something shifted. Slowly, painfully, my mother began to acknowledge the truth. It was easier, she finally admitted, tears streaming down her face. "Jason would fall apart if we didn't help him. You always managed, no matter what. We came to depend on that, to expect it. It wasn't fair to you." It wasn't a complete reckoning, but it was a start. Over the next several hours, we talked more honestly than we ever had before. I explained how the lifetime of differential treatment had affected me, how the will had felt like a final confirmation that my contributions to the family meant nothing. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said softly. "I just didn't see. I didn't want to see." Together, we explored practical solutions to her housing situation. I helped her find an affordable senior apartment complex with activities and community, but I was clear, I wouldn't be providing the security deposit or covering the rent. She would need to sell what remained of value from the house, furniture, jewelry, my father's remaining collectibles, to fund her new start. While helping her research housing options, Jason showed up unexpectedly, furious that his mother was abandoning the family home. "You can't just give up," he shouted. glaring at me as if the foreclosure were my fault. Samantha should be helping us save the house. That's what family does. For the first time in my life, I stood my ground against Jason's intimidation tactics without flinching or backing down. The house is in foreclosure because you accepted an inheritance you couldn't maintain, I said calmly. Mom is finding a sustainable living situation. If you want to save the house, you're welcome to get a mortgage of your own. My mother watched this exchange with new eyes. Later, she confessed, I've never seen how he talks to you. Has it always been like that? Yes, I said simply. It has. The house eventually went to auction, and I stood with my mother on the sidewalk as strangers walked through the home where I'd grown up. It was painful but also cathartic. The physical embodiment of the old family dynamic was being dismantled, making room for something new, something healthier. While cleaning out the remaining possessions before the new owners took possession, I made a discovery that changed everything. In my father's home office, tucked behind a row of accounting textbooks, I found a leather-bound journal I'd never seen before. Inside, in my father's distinctive handwriting, were private reflections spanning the last 5 years of his life. Many entries focused on family dynamics, and as I read, my hands trembled. My father had been aware, painfully, explicitly aware, of the favoritism that had shaped our family. Watch Samantha help her mother with the tax forms today. One entry read, She's so capable, so steady. We've always leaned on that strength, perhaps too much. Meanwhile, we keep rescuing Jason from his own mistakes. I fear we've crippled him with our help while taking Samantha's strength for granted. In another entry, dated just 2 months before his stroke, advised us on her investment portfolio today. She's built more wealth by 33 than I managed by 50. So proud of her accomplishments, though I rarely say it aloud. Wonder sometimes if she knows. I shared the journal with my mother, and the entries became a catalyst for deeper, more meaningful conversations about our family patterns. She read my father's private thoughts with tears streaming down her face, especially the entries where he questioned the fairness of their parenting and the wisdom of their estate plans. He knew, she whispered. He knew it wasn't right. That acknowledgement led to my mother's first genuine apology, not the defensive, I'm sorry you feel that way of past conflicts, but a true recognition of harm done. I failed you as a mother, she said, holding my hands tightly. I can't change the past, but I want to do better now if you'll let me. Jason initially refused my invitation to participate in family counseling, dismissing it as touchy-feely nonsense. But as his own situation deteriorated, eviction from his apartment, Brittany leaving after discovering he'd borrowed money in her name, he finally reached his own rock bottom. Our first family therapy session was tense and difficult. Jason arrived defensive and angry, ready to blame everyone but himself for his circumstances. But the skilled therapist created a space where decades of dysfunctional patterns could be named and examined. You've been cast as the golden child, she explained to Jason, and Samantha as the responsible one. These roles have limited both of you and damaged your relationship with each other. Jason's initial response was rage. So everything is mom and dad's fault? I'm just some puppet who couldn't make his own choices. No, the therapist replied calmly. But family patterns are powerful, and the first step to changing them is recognizing they exist. By the end of that session, something had shifted. Jason's defensive anger had cracked, revealing the insecurity beneath. I've never been good enough, he admitted, his voice breaking. Not like Samantha. She always did everything perfectly. I wasn't perfect, I countered gently. I was just afraid to fail because I never got the unconditional support you did. Every achievement was just meeting expectations, never exceeding them. It was the beginning of a new understanding between us, not an instant repair of decades of damage, but the foundation for something healthier. Over subsequent sessions, we began the painful work of dismantling the family mythology that had shaped our lives. For my mother, the process involved acknowledging how her own upbringing had influenced her parenting. My parents always compared me unfavorably to my sister, she revealed. I swore I'd never do that to my children, but instead, I overcorrected with Jason. I was so afraid of making him feel inadequate that I never held him accountable. These honest conversations created space for a new understanding of how our family dynamics had harmed all of us in different ways. Jason had been denied the opportunity to develop resilience and self-sufficiency. I had been denied recognition and emotional support. Our mother had trapped herself in a cycle of enabling that ultimately contributed to my father's financial stress and perhaps even his health problems. Most importantly, we began to understand that helping often wasn't helpful at all. My mother's recognition that her support of Jason had actually hindered his development was particularly powerful. I thought I was protecting you, she told him. Instead, I was telling you that I didn't believe you could succeed on your own. These realizations didn't instantly transform our family. Jason still struggled with accountability. My mother sometimes slipped into old patterns, and I occasionally found myself taking on the problem-solver role out of habit. But we now had the awareness and language to recognize these patterns and make different choices. One year after the will reading that had shattered my world, my life looked remarkably different. I had accepted a promotion to chief financial officer at my company, moved into a larger apartment in a quiet Boston neighborhood, and established a healthy, balanced relationship with both my work and my family. My mother had surprised us all with her resilience and growth. In her senior living community, she had discovered a talent for watercolor painting and formed new friendships independent of her identity as wife and mother. She took financial management classes at the community center and, for the first time in her adult life, managed her own budget successfully. The most significant change in her life, however, was her newfound independence. Using a small inheritance from her sister, she took her first-ever solo trip, a 10-day tour of the Southwest National Parks she had always dreamed of visiting. The photos she sent showed a woman I barely recognized, standing confidently at the Grand Canyon's edge, her smile more relaxed and genuine than I could remember seeing in decades. Jason's journey was slower and less linear, but equally real. After hitting rock bottom, couch surfing with increasingly reluctant friends, facing collection calls for unpaid debts, he finally accepted that change had to come from within. He found steady employment at an automotive parts store, work that was neither glamorous nor lucrative but provided stability he had never prioritized before. More importantly, he enrolled in a financial literacy course and, on his therapist's recommendation, began attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings. The gambling addiction he had hidden for years was finally being addressed, one day at a time. Our sibling relationship transformed from competition and resentment to limited but healthier contact based on clear boundaries. We spoke monthly, focused on the present rather than rehashing past grievances. We would never have the close sibling bond depicted in television shows, but we had something more authentic, a relationship based on who we actually were, not who our family mythology had cast us to be. My own transformation was perhaps the most profound. Through therapy and boundary work, I had released the desperate need for parental validation that had driven me for so long. I recognized the strength it had taken to survive my family dynamic, to achieve despite the lack of emotional support, to build a life on my own terms. Where holidays had once been exercises in obligation and disappointment, I now created new traditions based on joy and mutual respect. Some years I visited Chicago, other times my mother came to Boston. Sometimes Jason joined us, sometimes he didn't. The rigid expectations of perfect family gatherings had been replaced by more authentic connections. 6 months after she moved into her senior apartment, my mother sent me a handwritten letter that I now keep framed on my desk. "I failed you in so many ways," she wrote. "I took your strength for granted and punished you for your independence. I can never change the past or repay what was taken from you, both emotionally and financially. But I want you to know that I see you now, your generosity, your resilience, your success that came not because of our support, but despite its absence. I am more proud of you than I can express, and I hope to spend whatever time I have left showing you the respect and love you have always deserved. That letter, more than any inheritance, was the acknowledgement I had craved my entire life. It didn't erase the past, but it created space for a different future. My perspective on family obligation transformed completely. I now understood that true support meant empowering others, not enabling their dependency. When colleagues confided about their own family financial dramas, I shared my experience and helped them identify patterns of exploitation they might not have recognized. Financial therapist Olivia Taylor invited me to speak at several workshops on family financial boundaries. "Your story resonates with so many people," she explained. "Adult children are the fastest-growing demographic facing financial abuse, often from the very parents who should be their greatest supporters." The relationship between Jason and me would always bear the scars of our upbringing, but something unexpected happened as we both continued our individual healing journeys. After completing 6 months of addiction recovery, Jason asked to meet with me privately. "I owe you an apology," he said, the words clearly difficult for him. "I resented you for being everything I wasn't. Smart, successful, together. I told myself you had it easy, that you were mom and dad's favorite, even though deep down I knew that wasn't true. I played a role in driving you away from the family, and I'm sorry for that." His acknowledgement didn't instantly repair decades of damage, but it opened a door to something I had never thought possible, a relationship with my brother based on honesty rather than competition and resentment. The most unexpected gift of this painful journey was the freedom it ultimately provided. By losing my inheritance, the tangible representation of parental approval I had unconsciously sought my entire life, I was forced to recognize that the true inheritance worth having wasn't listed in any will or trust document. My real inheritance was the resilience I had developed, the success I had created, the boundaries I had learned to establish, and the authentic relationships now possible without the distorting lens of family mythology. I had lost a house, but gained something far more valuable, the ownership of my own story. The irony isn't lost on me. Being excluded from my father's will ultimately forced me to claim my most valuable asset, my self-respect and freedom from toxic family patterns. Sometimes, what appears to be the greatest betrayal becomes the catalyst for the most profound growth. Looking back now, I can see that text message, "The mortgage is due," as the moment my real life began. The inheritance I ultimately received wasn't listed in any will, but it's more valuable than any house or savings account could ever be. Have you ever experienced a family betrayal that ultimately led to unexpected personal growth? Share your story in the comments below. And if you found value in my journey from heartbreak to healing, please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and share with someone who might need to hear that family obligation should never come at the cost of self-respect. Thank you for walking this path with me, and remember, sometimes losing what you thought you wanted opens the door to what you truly need.